maybe like a description so that you can remember. Sometimes I would come up with names for things and then I wouldn't put a description on it. And then in a week or two, I just had an interesting name that I couldn't associate to. So on one side of the note card is a description of the trick of attention, point of attention. On the other side is a name. Create a little bit of a deck, shuffle that shit up, and then just pull one and see where your point of attention is today and how that, you know, uh, maybe maybe not exactly a divination technique, but I think there's some ways that it could be looked at that way. I might not, you know, dive into that, but it is an idea. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yes.
One of the biggest hustles, especially when you're in an avenue to coast, we typically coast when shit's not hitting the fan or things are going our way. So I noticed that I haven't done it since the move to Chicago. I haven't done that, but I've done it in the past when things really start to go your way is when typically that opportunity for coasting exists. Does that resonate, Mike? Have you noticed that? Or am I making that up?
Yeah. Yeah, we
So,
get like let our guard down type of thing.
right. And then sometimes what happens is a little bit of almost, what's a good way to say this? I don't want to sound, I want to deliberately sound nice when I say this. What's a good way to say this? It can help be a way to help maybe prevent that self hustle. The self hustle is when our attention isn't really deliberate. Like it's kind of, we're starting to go back towards the unconsciousness. Maybe we're not fully immersed in habit, completely using just memory to interact with the world around us, but we're going that direction. And so that's typically when the tricks of attention get a little bit wishy-washy. So that if I were to jump out of the sky and say, where is your mind now? There's going to be a little bit of a delay because you're going to go to where was your mind when you started the party? Because that's the trick of attention maybe that you intended in advance. And then it kind of got wishy-washy and it's getting further and further from the light of attention. So I kind of came up with the idea. I did it a long time ago. I haven't needed to do it myself. Maybe I'll just do it for fun because I have note cards, but is to create your toolbox on note cards, mix them up, and then pull one, and then you can't hustle yourself that way. Do you see what I mean? Do you know what I mean by the self hustle with the trick of attention? Have you experienced that yet? Where it's kind of quasi. It's not really taking on that deliberate nature that it can when it's predetermined. Does that make sense? Has anyone noticed that? Hi Ida, hi Karen, hi Lauren, hi Jerry, hi Shana. Yeah, so that's the coasting phenomenon. And then, so sometimes when we're coasting, we may have began with the trick of attention. So it's almost like a little bit of the residual. And we've talked about a little bit of residual, but not the type of residual where you've leveled up and now you can just, you know, take your foot off the deliberate pedal, so to speak. So this, yes,
Alpha
Mike.
Centaurian and stuff.
Exactly. But the idea here, Mike just mentioned he had bar mitzvah this weekend, and it sounds like the practice was good until a little bit, later in the evening, which also kind of makes sense. Those are some other things that you may have noticed is that sometimes the trick of attention in the beginning, especially when the mind or body is tired, it can be a little bit, it can feel more difficult. Yeah. You described just now with not experiencing the deliberate nature makes huge sense. Yes. And so, what do you think? What are ways that we can make sure that the point of attention is an act of deliberate nature in the beginning? I can only tell you, and then maybe Ida, Shayna, others who are, have been practicing this for a while, you can maintain deliberate nature without the note cards and without intending it in advance. But in the beginning, we really have to kind of see what that feels like, you know, experience that deliberate nature in the beginning. And the best way to make sure it's deliberate in the beginning is what? What do you think are great ways to make sure that the trick of attention is a deliberate act in the beginning? Later, you'll be able to feel the difference, of course, but predetermined, absolutely. Write it down, absolutely. A little bit of a plan. So what Mike was talking about inspired me to share, and I've had this idea for a while. I don't know, I think I've shared it before, I'm not sure, but is essentially to create your toolbox on index cards or, you know, pieces of paper. I don't know, it doesn't have to be an index card, but mix them up. Maybe put them in a hat. Maybe create like a little Rolodex type of, you know, thingy. And essentially what you do is you just pick, and that's your trick of attention for today. That can take away some of the, Ida, have you ever experienced that it's like, we sometimes we take our psychological suffering to everything. And then now all of a sudden, picking our trick of attention is a new form of psychological suffering. And now we start thinking about which tricks of attention should we do today. And I've experienced that. So I don't know, Ida, if you have as well. But I picked you for a reason, because I think maybe you have. A jar of tricks. Yep. And then just kind of pull one. Now, I think Jenny is working in the morning on Mondays, she said. But if we wanted to just have fun, you know, maybe not take it too seriously or take it seriously, it's up to you. It could get a little bit into divination, in a manner of speaking, because you pick your card, it has your trick of attention. That's where the direction of your mind will be, is towards that trick of attention. And we may see something that if it had been somewhere else, we may not have seen. So, but of course, if it was somewhere else, we would have seen something else. So it's not good or bad, better or worse, plus or minus. It's just the act of the randomness will help determine the point of attention for that day. And then what we see, I put that in air quotes, but it's also quite literal. It can be literal, or it can be, when I talk about seeing, I'm talking about feeling your life experience as opposed to just intellectualizing it and conceptualizing it. And then the divination aspect would be the random nature, not being random. Because it's in, I guess you could look at it as the lines of the world. The way everything is moving, we can sometimes make predictions, although it's not a guarantee because the electron can be anywhere around its nucleus and we don't know. But typically we can actually know where it's at because we can have projections, in a manner of speaking. All right, so lots of things going on in the world. And sometimes our practice can slip a little bit when things like that happen. Obviously, when there's a lot of suffering around in the world, and I'm not suffering at all, there could be all kinds of things that come up intellectually. So if anything like that has occurred, I think this is a great space to discuss those types of things, because what's happening in the world today is it's the example, second, of psychological suffering. Would anybody like to comment? Well, that's a sign from the world around me, maybe to pause.
I was just going to share what I thought was kind of a funny story. Briefly, when you were talking about seeing things or as you pick your tricks. This is when we were still out in Arizona. Or you said something about how you'll just notice things based on maybe what your trick is for the day or what you choose or something. I was on my way, it was, early in the morning. I was on my way downtown to run some errands. And I had started some processes that morning, but when I got into my car, I remembered, hey, you hadn't picked a color today. You wanted to pick a color. So I just picked yellow, just went with that. Coming around the corner and I'm just, doing my thing. Focus, present, yellow. being in the moment. Got down to the highway and I took a right. And as I was, watching traffic and, noticing a little bit of yellow and minding my lack of thought, and I looked off to the left, just looking at traffic or the landscape, and I started getting busy. I could just feel it immediately. My mind was just starting to talk. It's starting to get chattery. And I was just kind of like, whoa, Jared, check back in. And I turned my head forward to the stop sign, and right in front of me was this bright yellow Corvette just sitting right in front of me. It was just the way it happened. When I checked back in, whoa, get back to the color. Just that car sitting right in front of me was, it just was funny.
Well, now the truck is backing up, but so no, I'm not talking. I'm sorry. No, I just did the screen share. I took the opportunity. Yeah, the truck was doing its backup thing, so it goes back and forth a few times trying to get around the corner. So on the screen share, this is our famous water pipe example of when the mind is not in forms of cognitive resistance, there is a type of flow, and it's a type of connective thing. And Shayna and I, we had a conversation about the differences between the words that we use, and the word intelligence, as the way I use the word, may not have anything to do with information. Intelligence, the way that I'm using the word, has something to do with more of a connection to all things. When we make our connection to everything else, there's a form of intelligence that can come from that. And then we can act on that, and that's more wisdom. Does that make sense? So Jerry sees that color yellow, and I think the important thing though is it means it may not necessarily mean anything to anybody else, and that's definitely a key point to make, because that's a common error. But, and I'm not saying Jerry made that error at all. She did. I have no reason to believe that that occurred at all. But I'm just interjecting that because that can occur. But it could mean something to her, that you can have that inner guru thing, or just the knowing of, you know, keeping your attention where it's supposed to be. And I put supposed to in terms of where you have personally determined that you want it to be. And for Jerry, it was the color yellow. She went back to her practice when she started to feel it going away, and then she gets the affirmation from the world. That's a way to look at it. Another word you could use for that is omen, but it's coming from the connectivity. If you are in a form of cognitive resistance where you're thinking about not thinking, thinking about what other people are thinking about what you should be thinking about, you know, judging yourself, good, bad, plus, minus, up, down, left, right, consistently, constantly, repetitively, that connection isn't occurring as much. Or we're at least not noticing it. We're not paying attention to it. So we love to say that love is everywhere, it's always existing, or that these things are everywhere and it's all encompassing, it's always existing around us, and that's, in a manner of speaking, accurate. But if you're not paying attention to it, it doesn't exist to you. If you're not feeling the love, it doesn't exist to you. If you're not feeling peace, it doesn't exist to you. Does that make sense? So I really like the way that Jerry was describing that. And then one thing that, she could look at it, it could as a type of affirmation. And I would say, just based on what you said, it's an affirmation of going back to the practice. The moment you went back to the practice, you get the affirmation. I wouldn't go into what would be another common error, Jerry. So you see the yellow, it's an affirmation to go back to your practice. What would be the next common error? Hi, Lisa.
Oh, look what I did.
That could be what I would call that sensationalizing. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What could be another common error? So Jerry in this example is practicing and she has determined the color yellow. She starts to go away from the practice for whatever reason. It happens. Our mind, our attention starts to get diverted. And then she goes back to her practice and then sees like a yellow, what'd you say? Corvette?
Yeah, it was a Corvette. Big, shiny, yellow Corvette.
Okay, yeah. I really like what Lauren has commented. That would be definitely one that we would make early on too, is that we would get down on ourselves for having gone away at all. I think that's a hugely inappropriate error. But I think that could be very common in the beginning for sure. Oh, these are great ones. Any other common errors? That's actually still not the one I had in mind, but I like it. Those are all perfectly valid. Yeah.
Talking about it or trying to explain it to somebody else. Not what
Okay.
you're doing today, because that was good for us, but like going home and trying to tell my husband about it or something, when
Okay.
it's not necessary to talk about it.
I think that would be a little bit in the sensationalizing category as well. You were getting really close to where I was going, and in my mind, the the next trap would be, oh, labeling it as another one. Sure, I don't think that's labeling isn't necessary, but if we start to get trapped in the labels, now we're just thinking again. Because what is a label? It's a thought. It's a thought based around a concept, and that's all fine and great. But why in the hell would we need to recite that to ourselves again and again and again and again? It doesn't lead to anywhere creative or productive necessarily. Yeah, so actually the one that I was thinking of, or the one that occurred to me, was trying to figure it out. So now Jerry has determined the color yellow. She starts to go away from her practice, and then she sees the yellow because she went back to her practice, and it's like, and then she's like, what does it mean? What is the universe trying to tell me?
I started that.
Did you?
For
Okay. There you
no,
go.
no,
See
for
that?
it lasted a second, just a second, because as soon as I turned my head back straight to the stop sign, the car was right there in front of me. I mean, right there. And for a second, I started to or to add dialogue to it, and I just stopped it immediately. Went back to the practice. No, I'm not going to try to figure this out. No.
Perfect.
But I started it for a second.
Okay. Now let's take this example. And last week we talked a little bit, I think it was last week, it could have been 2 weeks, I have no idea. But we talked about the voice of power. How could the voice of power apply to this situation? Any ideas? Of course I have one, but where would the voice of power, do you think, come in Jerry's example? Let's use Jerry's example if she started to try to figure it out for just a split second, and the fact that she saw that is a part of cognitive attention training, when we are aware of our thoughts as they occur. So my son has given me the advice of do not comment. There's just 9 times out of 10, there's no need for a Facebook comment. So, okay, I have the information. I have the experience, because 9 times out of 10, it's just not going anywhere. So I have information, I have experience, I have his experience, I have my own experience. Does that guarantee wisdom or expressing knowledge? No guarantee. But if I have what Jerry is talking about with cognitive attention, the next time I'm about to start typing, I can either delete it or whatever, because I'm aware of my own output. I'm aware of my thoughts, I'm aware of my actions, and I'm aware of my behaviors as they're occurring, which gives you an opportunity to redirect. Not necessarily use force, not necessarily the energy of denial, but simply place your attention elsewhere you want it to be. I've never said it that way, but yeah, somewhere else, but also where you want it to be. So how could the voice of power come? You're defining this as the voice of power. No, sorry, Jerry, that was a different thing. But how could the voice of power come into play? Jerry, I am about to type something on Facebook. You are about to go into trying to figure it out. Where could the voice of power creep into this example? As a matter of fact, it absolutely would for me.
I guess for me, just trying to, go into that moment you're describing, for me, it'd probably sound like, just stop. You're trying to control a situation here. You're trying to interject yourself. It reeks of control. Just stop, move on, scroll on, stop.
Yes. Yeah. I like that. If it was my mind, it would be a little bit more structured. And I say structured just so it's not going off into another type of thinking about the thinking. And I'm not saying that yours was, I'm not saying that's where you were going, but so the way that I would probably, or the voice of, so the voice of power, of course, has different degrees. It's a different scope, a different spectrum of the voice of power. So in the beginning, we're telling ourselves true things, we're using mantras, and then later it's a lot like Jerry described, where it is just telling you what's what. This isn't serving you. You have already agreed not to do this. Let's just put our focus somewhere else. This is fine. We'll come back to it maybe if we want to later, but let's just put our focus somewhere else. So, but in the beginning, I probably would have done something more like a mantra, maybe reminding myself that, I have decided not to make the Facebook comment. In Jerry's example, I would go back to my practice. I would say warrior training. I am violating a principle of warrior training in terms of trying to figure it out. Trying to figure it out isn't how I figure anything out. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much.
So the voice of power in the beginning of a person's practice would be remind yourself of the color yellow in some way. Like, nope, my practice is to pay attention to the color yellow and that's it. Not good, not bad. I'm not, ignoring anything. It's not denial. The thought's going to occur again. You just don't have to indulge it. Of course it's going to occur again. So you're not ignoring problems or anything. Somebody's punching you in the face, to simply move aside is not ignoring the problem. You're just not meeting it with force. You just, when the punch comes, be there. In a manner of speaking. Questions about that? Does that make sense? Any other ways that the voice of power? Like, how did that? Yes.
I was thinking while you were talking there, sometimes on Facebook, you can see an obvious thing that I find I've seen something that I can obviously correct, and I don't go there to do that anymore. That's where the voice of power comes in, saying, this person has responded to me. I can see that I could, my ego would maybe say, well, I know better than that. I could fix this. I could tell them the right answer. But then the voice of power comes in and says, it's okay. It's just a comment. Just don't have to go into a long explanation and try and fix everything.
Yeah. So sometimes the voice of power could identify the particular type of psychosis that's occurring. So for you, mine would have been a little bit different. Mine had maybe a little bit less to do with self-importance and more so I kind of see what's going on in the world and I care about it, and it's almost like a different type of attempt to manipulate and use force. Does that make sense? It's not the four voices, because I'm meeting unconsciousness with unconsciousness, or I'm trying to meet unconsciousness with power, and those are incompatible. Does that make sense? So, but I completely agree. So that happened to me today. My desire to make the comment was because I just see so much of this occurring around us and we're just swimming in this soup of shit. And I tried to meet that with voice of power, and it just doesn't ever really go that way or go well. That would be Don Juan's maybe not meeting human beings or confronting them directly. It would be, yeah, for sure. Finding ways to interact with that thing or anything like that, really, in a productive way, as opposed to.
Well, Ernest, you're much further on. Obviously, you've been doing this for years, but to notice, I can't help but notice that those wee subtle things are changing, and it's nice not to be able to be, I was going to say above it, but to be able to look at it from an outsider's point of view nearly and see that they're changing.
Mhm.
And it feels less stressy than getting involved in it all, if you know what I mean.
It does, and I can understand. I think sometimes that compassionate side, though, it's like we just want it to stop. You know, we want the disinformation and the madness and the confusion to be like, hey, let's go back to the way that it, well, not the way that it was, but you know, we have evidence based. That's a phrase for a reason. It's really important. What we're doing here is to help provide evidence for the efficacy of what we're doing. Do you know what I mean? That's okay, right? Like, I'm not going to go around and talk about or try to share or teach something that I don't know, or at least have some idea that it is transferable, it's teachable, something other people can do. I have accepted the at least slight possibility that it's an anomaly, but I know that's not true now. I can see it around me. Shayna's a perfect example, and of course, all of you are as well. That attention is determining everything. Does that make sense? Anybody want to add to that or take away? I don't know. Let's.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
No,
No,
go ahead, please.
when you just said that, I just went into my head. My first thought was, there's just nothing more important than we could be doing than deliberate attention.
No, there's nothing else more important than deliberate
Yeah,
attention.
there's
The
just
direction of,
nothing
yeah,
else. Yeah. No diet, no
no
exercise.
diet,
It's
no
all good.
exercise.
It's all good,
Yeah, no.
but there's just nothing more important than a deliberate mind.
No, there's nothing more important than a deliberate mind. I can't, I hope, I mean, I may be biased just because I'm, you know, this is my most keen interest in my entire life experience is the human mind, not the brain. I told my son that yesterday. I'm not interested in neurobiology necessarily, although I am. I'm super interested, but that's not my passion. You know, my passion is cognition, the way that we think, the way that we interact with our thought, the way that our thought is determining a lot. However, we can back it up. The thought is a derivative and is directly proportional to the direction of our attention. Notice that. Any thought that you're thinking is also piggybacking the direction of your attention in that moment. And if your attention is turning in on thought, I mean, then the direction of your attention is not engaging the world around you, and I could probably sneak up and scare the crap out of you. Because the mind doesn't do both very well. But developing the deliberate mind is the key fundamental aspect to developing a deliberate life experience. Everything is where you have put it. The clothes on your back are the ones that you have chosen. Where you are in this world right now, I mean, you may not think so, but you have chosen to be there, or it's, you know, habitually you have placed yourself there, but you're there. You know, you have put yourself there. The thoughts that you're thinking, they are originating from inside your cognition, your mind. That's your responsibility. That's your output into the universe. Every action, every thought, every emotion, they're ours. We're creating them. We're putting them there, in a manner of speaking. And the difference is, are we putting them there out of habit? Are we putting them there out of unconscious action, which is habit? That is the definition of habit. I just said the same thing twice. Or are we putting it there because that's where we want it? We have determined it. It's a type of focus. There's a big difference, and you have all felt it here. There's a big difference in the type of focus when it's intentional and when it is in default. Attention feels very different. Our experience feels very different. In the beginning, we may have to have note cards and everything, but the more that we practice, you can feel when you are in your deliberate nature and when you're not, where you're paying attention to your body and your breath, proprioception, everything. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, please. I'd love to. I'm good at Q&A. But what could be more important than your mind? Mike, haven't we seen, and I'm using Mike because he's in my top left-hand corner. He's also in New York City, so he probably sees this a lot. How many times have we seen people with unimaginable amounts of money, unimaginable amounts of material possessions, unimaginable amounts of educational, feats, perhaps? Maybe they have a PhD in advanced mathematics or something like that. And this isn't necessarily a judgment. It's not specific. It's not an opinion specifically about a person and what they're doing. But how many times have we seen that and there is no peace, or there is no deliberate nature there? It happens all the time. So one doesn't necessarily have to do with the other. So why would I want to be rich with a mind that's not deliberate, with a mind that isn't what I want it to be? I would just end up creating more suffering with that money. Why would I want to travel to Alpha Centauri to interact with interdimensional translucent beings if I have no peace, if I have no, if I don't feel love and connection? I'm just going to share my psychological suffering. Probably I'll be afraid and try to kill them or something if I'm in that modality. Yeah, I like that, Lauren. And I usually equate the word light to attention, the light of attention, the spark of attention, the infinite spark. That's the name of one of my books. The infinite spark.
I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me in deliberate mind jail. I'm sure you'll put me there. I read an article this morning. Bill Gates and Melinda French Gates getting a divorce, talking about, just an article, what Bill's been up to, hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein before he killed himself, and all this and that. And some of the interaction with women at work. And my mind just for the sake of the conversation, you were bringing up, you can have all this money and have all this. You're Bill Gates. You're worth $177 billion. I don't even know what that is. But yet you're walking around the office and at dinner parties. I'm unhappy with my marriage. Would you like to have dinner? And these women are like, whoa, I'm not touching this. But you've got a guy with a deliberate mind and that kind of access, has the potential to develop beautiful happiness and direction and but he's just unhappy in his marriage and he wants the attention of some of these women. And it's just, where I'm going with this, a lot of judgment and stuff. But I'm just saying, for the sake of the conversation, like you just said, money isn't going to do it. Or you can have all that and still just be lonely and, just talking.
No, I agree. So I didn't disagree with anything that you just said. And I don't agree with what Lauren just said. And let's just look at it just real quick. We're going to deviate for just a second, and then we'll go back. I have an idea for something. But so judgment is, now the way that I use judgment here is the difference between discernment and judgment. That's the most popular question. Like, which is which? Discernment does not require words. It does not require cognition. You can be walking along and you can see that your path is blocked with a tree and you just go around. You discerned. You made a discernment and a choice based on that discernment, and it did not require verbal, word-based cognition in your mind. You didn't need to talk to yourself. You still might, but it's absolutely not necessary. Does that make sense? That's how I use the word discernment. Dogs can discern. Birds can discern, but they don't speak words. They don't use language in the way that we do. Discernment does not require opinion. Does that make sense? Okay. However, on the other hand, we have judgment, which is an opinion. We have made a verbal, word-based, cognitive opinion about yada yada. So, Ida, with the principle of balance and the golden mean in mind, is judgment bad? Is what Jerry did bad and she should go to cognitive attention jail?
No,
No. Why not? Why would judgment not be, in air quotes, bad?
because that's a judgment in itself.
That's a judgment in itself. Bingo. Oh God, Ida, that was perfect. Oh, sign for the world for me to shut up. Hold on a second. So Jerry, tell me how that judgment is basically, just like everything else, of course, is subject to the principle of the golden mean or balance.
I don't know if I can answer that, but maybe this will help you define it better for us. In that moment, for me, typically everything is class. I'm never not in class. And as I was reading it, I'm sure it was judgment, of course, or a violation of
It was.
Hawkins
Not
and stuff.
necessarily, though. That's
But
what I'm hoping to. Sorry.
Oh, anyway, at the time, what I was thinking in my mind was, okay, I have a deliberate practice. I now have $177 billion. Sounds like my wife wants to divorce me, or, I don't know. Maybe let's back up. I skipped ahead. But just some of the things people anonymously were saying about him, what he had been doing at the office, my mind just went to, I just don't see me having this practice and acting out on that kind of lack. I would recognize it as lack, and in ways that I'm out of balance before I start asking these women out to dinner quietly at a dinner party. It's inappropriate. You're married, they're your employees. I was just class, and I was just, all that you're talking about, I was doing. But it was, I'm just saying, I told you I was going to get in trouble. But I'm just saying, in that moment, I was thinking, gosh, there you go again. If I was Bill Gates with a deliberate practice, my life would be very different. It could be so much better with all this abundance. I was responding to what you said, his money's not going to buy happiness, and that made me think of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be quiet now.
No, you're good. So now we have a couple more things to talk about. So first off, the thought occurring isn't necessarily good or bad, plus or minus. It's subject to the principle of balance. If this is a part of a greater habit, I recommend the rule of three. So if this is something that a person is doing often, then it needs to be rule of three, because it will accumulate. If the thought occurs, it's just an occurrence. If it becomes repetitive, habitual, isn't making you feel well, you notice that it's violating principle, then we just go back to our practice, right? Either that makes sense. If we start labeling it, judging it, comparing and contrasting our own labeling and judging and comparing and contrasting, we just went a layer on top of a layer of dysfunctional cognition. So I wouldn't judge Jerry for having the thought, for having the comparison. It occurred in the moment, it came up. What I would say, though, is if she continued to think that, if it started to churn, back to the practice, rule of three, go. Now, there was a certain point where if I saw any of that cognition, because I recognized it as a part of a greater pattern, I would rule of three immediately. And that's when we start to get into the seer's practice and warrior training, where no thought of other, and that's probably something that I could even remind myself of a lot too. I'm in a city, a lot of people, a lot of things going on, Facebook, a lot of people, a lot of things going on. It would be very wise for me to remind myself. That would be an expression, the wisdom. It would be very wise for me even to remind myself that no thought really that is repetitive about another person serves me. I've already thought it. It's not original, it's not new, it's not serving anything. The same sentence in the same order again and again and again does not lead to anything really. I've thought it once, I thought it twice, I thought it 1,000 times. Let's just go ahead and think something else, or something new, or something creative, or something solution based. Does that make sense? So I just think that's an important point to make. If we were to start to beat ourselves up about the thought, then of course that's leaking power, but thoughts will occur. And then the more that you practice, those thoughts won't occur. It's just the way it is. See what I mean? It will dissolve. So let's look at this real quick. I don't need to save this whiteboard, although I did a really good job with that R, with the line through it for resistance. That one looks nice. Well, maybe I will save it then. I do like this one. Okay. I might need a diagonal arrow because this might be a little bit longer. Okay, so this entire practice is based on a theory. And the theory is something that I call asset. And it is theory, not hypothesis. Why is it theory? Because every single person here can demonstrate it. But I can't really tell you how and why we have attention, what it is. So I have to keep it in the category of theory. Does that make sense? We're also proving it still, but theory, not hypothesis. If we have taken it from hypothesis, we've worked with it, we've shown, we have experiments, demonstrations. Do you guys remember what the demonstration is for asset, active, and selective? What would be a good demonstration for active and selective sensory engagement? Basically, trick of attention. And so I wanted to highlight that. So asset equals, essentially, that's what I'm talking about. I just put it in words that academic folks will like, or not like, who knows? That's a trick of attention. But the thesis is asset, basically showing that this can be done. Our attention can be deliberate. We already know that, but it doesn't look like anybody has ever really come out and made it a point. I have this book on attention. It's the textbook on attention, and it's not saying anything really that we're talking about. And it's like, why not? This is obvious stuff. What's obvious to me? I don't know. Is it obvious to you? So how would you guys demonstrate asset? Any ideas? Just curious. Of course I know, but Shayna, do you have an idea? How would we demonstrate that theory? If it's a theory, it's demonstratable. We can show people. I can, and you can go reproduce this experiment, and we could compare. What's an experiment? What's something that we can do to show that we can actively and selectively engage our sensory attention?
Put your attention on your breath.
Sure. Okay. So you've put your attention on your breath. Anything else that you'd like to add to that particular experiment?
Say a mantra.
Okay. Say a mantra. That would be two things that are very on purpose.
And feel your body awareness of
right.
your body.
Okay. Yeah, so we're starting to describe tricks of attention, which is great. Defocused vision is another, that's the one that I use most often. It's been the one that has helped me the most with social anxiety. And I kind of mentioned it to Shayna before, that when we're around a lot of people, I use defocused vision so that I can maintain my deliberate attention. It's important for me because of my spider's web, you know. Somebody else may not need that as much. So, but what about how long you're looking at it? Let's say Ida has chosen the breath. Lauren, let's say that you've chosen defocused vision. Wouldn't you say determining the length of that deliberate attention is an act of your choice? Not habit, not conditioning. You've chosen to defocus your vision for the rest of the day. You might forget and then you go back. You might forget and then you go back. That's fine. But wouldn't we say that that is a demonstration of an act of free will and an act of selective attention?
Yeah, choice. It's your
It's a
choice.
choice.
Whether to breathe in for 4 or out for 4 or
Exactly.
whatever it is you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason that the breath is so good is because it's a part of that. It's a part of the autonomic nervous system, but it's also we can determine the breath, so it works both ways. That's why the breath works so well for deliberate attention. We can't hustle ourselves as well with our own breath. So does that make sense? So we'll define active. That means right now. That doesn't mean, you know, you did it this morning or you're woke or anything, or you're enlightened or you've gotten there. I don't know, you've leveled up. So that none of that is active to me. I don't view those as action words. I view those as philosophical, conceptual things because you're going to have to define that, right? If Mike walks in the room, he's like, Ernest, I leveled up. I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Unless he's like glowing or something, you know, like he has changed his luminosity and he is now translucent. I don't know what he's talking about when he says he's leveled up. He has to explain that. You see what I mean? So it's a concept. He's basically just making shit up. And that's okay because we have words to describe experience. I make shit up all the time to describe my experience because nobody else has done it for me yet. That's okay. But enlightenment is now. It's a feeling that is occurring now or it's not. So, Jerry, we're on the first word of your question, active. We're just focusing on it one at a time.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. So active means right now, not abstract, not ideological, not conceptual. It is either occurring presently or it's not. So let's use anything, love. Can you give me an example of abstract, conceptual idealism, love, and actuality occurring now? What would be the difference? I want to
The feeling.
The feeling. I said I wanted to answer it myself because that's exactly what I was going to say, Jerry. Perfect. Lauren, perfect. And I only say perfect because that's what I was going to say. But yes, a feeling. So, but Lauren, if you are raging with anger and you're just fed up with everything, where's the love? Are you feeling it? So is it active? No. So let's say that you're driving your car, listening to the music, and you are completely engaging memory to operate your motor vehicle. Is your attention necessarily active? No, not necessarily. It could be quite abstract. It could be quite habitual. So the first word in active is that we're actively selecting. What's the selection? What are we doing when we're selecting? What does that mean? How does one select actively?
You choose something and then follow through with your choice.
Boom. That's pretty simple. You pick a trick of attention and then you do it. How long you do it? Active. The quality that you do it with. Remember, you can hold multiple points of attention. You can have degrees of attention. Aha. All of this is active choice. I can split my attention. I can listen a little bit behind me and look a little bit in front of me. My attention is actively going two different directions, on purpose, because I chose it, because I put it there, because my mind is deliberate in that way. Does that make sense? Not by accident, of course, because it's active and selective. What are we doing though? Like we're actively selecting, but what are we using for all of this to occur? Without this, it just doesn't happen. Engaging attention. So we have active, selective. What are we using? Senses, our senses. Mm-hmm. And that's every psychologist and every neurobiologist. Now we're starting to talk their language. We're like, oh, we're using sensory perception. We're using vision. We're using our ability to hear, our ability to smell, our ability to taste. Proprioception, the awareness of our body in space and time. All of our senses working together, our inner ear function for balance, and we have all of this beautiful sensory perception. Without it, you are in a dark void of nothing. Which is common. What do you mean there, Lauren? Which is common with formal meditation. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Very common with formal meditation. Absolutely. Is to sit and engage your senses deliberately. Absolutely. So do you see, Lauren, what we're doing is we're just taking what is in that formal meditation and we're taking it with us. And that's called mindfulness. Absolutely. That is mindfulness. Actively, selectively. What are we selective? Our sensory engagement. Engagement. That's an interesting word. Why do you think I use the word engagement in that theory?
Because it's the present moment.
Mm-hmm. And you're interacting with it, aren't you? What did human beings, and then, my son he's my fact checker, so he can tell me, a little bit about the way human beings evolved. But in terms of human evolution or any type of evolution, what about that engagement aspect? Engaging as opposed to abstract, but engagement has a feeling, and it's necessary for the flow between the points. Do you see what I mean? Engaging the present moment, connecting to the present moment, not just being here. I don't want to just be paying attention. I do think that has a place. So Lauren, that's also sometimes a part of formal meditation, where you are just the watcher. Have you heard of that before? I want to put in air quotes, no mind, because that's not a phrase I use. Maybe no thought in that moment, and then when they occur, you just watch them go by. I get it. So it's another aspect of the formal meditation, but we have this just watching. Is engagement just watching? No. No. So if you're just watching, will that guarantee that when the punch comes, be there? That when space junk falls from the sky, you move out of the way? That when the car zigs, you zag? No. If you're just watching, you're still going to get punched. Passivity. That is a form of passivity. The watcher is a form of passivity. And that's okay. I mean, you're connecting to the environment, but you're not necessarily moving with it. You see what I mean? You're just there, watching it all go by. Which is fine for a little while. I mean, until you need to move your body. And then that's when mindfulness comes into play. So the engagement aspect has to do with adaptability. So active and selective sensory engagement theory. We are actively selecting our point of attention, using our sensory attention or our sensory perception, our sensory abilities that the human being has. And we're engaging the world around us so that we can adapt to incoming stimuli. The better that we can adapt, the better chance we have to change over time because we survive. If we can adapt, we can survive. If we can survive, we can change over time. If we can change over time, we can evolve. Bottom line. Does that make sense? Those two, I do active and selective. Yeah, there's a little and in there. Active and selective sensory engagement theory. Trick of attention. I had to do all of that yes, Jerry.
Selective as in choice.
As in choice, as in the color yellow that day for you was the selective. Because if it's not selective, how do we know it's active? We really got to put those two together. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think I heard you differently in the beginning, which I thought you were comparing active versus selective, but I see now it's all together. It's all together.
They're together. Yeah, they're together. Okay, so we're going to put asset as a trick of attention. That's pretty much the base of this practice. That's pretty much what we're doing. And we want it to be engaging so that we can adapt. We have to be able to engage and interact with the world around us in order to be able to adapt to it. We can't just stand there. We have to move our body if space junk is falling from the sky. Unless you have some sort of telekinesis technique that I don't know about, you got to move. You got to get out of the way. I'm not going to sit there and let somebody punch me in the face. I'm going to move and get out of the way. I don't prescribe to passivity. So what we're doing isn't ignoring, it's not passive, it's deliberate. Okay, so we have asset. What's another of our initials? We have sensory attention training. And if I were to, so we have asset down here at the beginning. It's kind of the base of our practice, the base theory. And then we have our next little aspect of the practice, our next acronym, and that's sensory attention training. Now that's just another word for what I've already described with asset. But sometimes in the academic, you really gotta break it down. So I've broken it down even further to take it away from, mysticism. I have no problem with mysticism, but mysticism will never be accepted by academia because by definition, mysticism cannot be proven. Mysticism, you don't know. It's mystical. There's no reason or rhyme, or at least we don't know it. That's why it's mystical. So by definition, this is not mysticism. This is biology. This is what we're doing. We have the opportunity with SAT. What is SAT? What are we doing? What's our opportunity? SAT, sensory attention training. We have the opportunity to do what?
Engage.
Yeah, without sensory attention training, you cannot engage. Not the way that I use the word.
So what did you say? We have the opportunity to what?
Sensory attention training is essentially the base of our practice. That's all we're doing, which is paying attention to our senses. That's it. That's all this practice is. Can you believe that? It's just this. That's all. That's all I'm recommending that every single person here do. And embody is to pay attention to your senses, not to think a different thought that I've told you to think, not to go from one type of thinking to another type of thinking or from one type of belief to another type of belief. Asset, you can do. You can see it right now. Sensory attention. Can anybody put their attention on their senses on purpose? Fucking of course. So it's proven. It's not a hypothesis. You can do it. Shane's making fun of me. So does that make sense? Sensory attention training. That's all T is. That's all basic alignment is. That's all counterbalance is. That's all seers training is. It's all warriors training is. Hydrostasy is based off of those three words. Sensory attention training. Learning to pay attention to our senses on purpose. That's it. Isn't that simple as shit? Are you doing that all the time though? maybe, maybe not, maybe more now than ever. But before you started practicing T and working with me, how often were we paying attention to our senses on purpose in a way that we have determined? Intentionally, deliberately, willfully, the direction of your entire experience happening now, when did you point it on purpose into your senses?
Maybe accidentally in the past, but never consciously.
Okay, fair
Well,
answer.
there's a bit extreme, but it probably was accidental.
I had times where I would, sometimes, it just depended, but it wasn't deliberate, it wasn't consistent and it wasn't a practice. Maybe we did this in yoga, maybe we did this in Tai Chi. We would deliberately pay attention to our senses in yoga. Isn't that what you do as a yoga teacher, Michael? If I were to walk into your yoga studio and you didn't know me, wouldn't you encourage me to pay attention to my body? That's your central nervous, excuse me, that's your peripheral nervous system. You can't sense into your body without your peripheral nervous system. You are sensing. That is a sensory perception. Electrical signals are being sent via the neural network in your spine to your brain to tell you that you are touching something or that you're feeling air against your skin. So this is all quite technical and biological in nature. That's a good example. Ida? That we'll have a workshop on that though. Okay, so cognitive attention training, perfect. Sensory, oh no, we haven't gotten into that one yet. Okay, so let's do another acronym and you guys can tell me what you think about it. Let's say a person has decided to embody this practice though. When we get into embodiment, and embodiment is very simple. It just means you do it all the time. You don't cherry pick, it's not sometimes. So if you want to be an activist and you embody it, you do it all the time in everything that you do, everything that you say. It's a part of every moment because there's just one moment where there's never been multiple moments. It's always just been this moment happening now. Our mind has the ability to remember, and that creates the past. We also have imagination abilities, and that creates the future. Time is the observation of causality, movement. There is no such thing. If we want to determine time, we use rate of change. Okay. Or we use the speed of light, but we already know that things like neutrinos are traveling faster than the speed of light. And we already know that we can interact with particles that instantaneously interact with other particles, which is the quantum entanglement, which is spooky action at a distance. Einstein called it spooky because it violated the constant of the speed of light. Okay, so we have sensory attention training, asset, and now we're going to get into if a person wants to embody, they're going to do, this is now the counterbalance training. Ooh. I'll put that in parentheses. Okay, so cognitive. Oh, I didn't want to tell you what it was. So what does CRT stand for? Sorry. Okay, you got the first word, cognitive. So what does CRT stand for? If you're doing anything past the counterbalance phase of the T training, then you are doing the CRT. What is CRT? Acronyms are for, yeah, they're for my thesis. Redirection.
Would you put the whiteboard back up?
Yeah, sure.
You had CBT, counterbalance. Okay.
CRT.
And now and now you want to know CRT.
Yeah, so CRT is a part of the counterbalance phase. SAT and asset are part of it all, but it's also a part of basic alignment. Because if I were going to teach you fox walking, wouldn't I teach you sensory attention training and by default asset? Right, Jerry? If we're going to do some fox walking today, or we're going to do some deliberate beverage, basic mindfulness practices, won't that absolutely? Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So it's not, I got my glasses on, darn it. So it's not CBT. I thought it was CBT counterbalance, but no, it's CRT counterbalance. CRT. And then you have CRT again to the right.
No. Hold on 1 second, okay? So CRT is, I'll just tell you, it's cognitive redirection therapy. This is a form of therapy. and it is the rule of 3. And it is a part of the counterbalance phase of training. Does that make sense, Jerry?
Yes. And
Okay.
then I just saw Lauren's question, cat.
Oh.
Yeah, what was that?
We're getting to that one. Oh, isn't oh, you're right. Oh, no. She's right. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Let's do that one first. Oh, wait, no, it's not right. Let me explain why. I'm sorry. No, you're good one. No, I'll show you why. Okay. Sorry. I'll show you why that one comes next, Lauren. But I also know why we would think that one comes first. But I will explain why that doesn't. And then maybe we could discuss it and see if we agree. So cognitive redirection therapy is what? Is it passivity? Is it pretending that your problems don't exist? Is it just acting like atrocities aren't happening all over the world so that we can sit in our own little corner of deception? Of course not. What is cognitive redirection therapy then? It's not cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not qualified to teach that. And I know I don't want to teach that. I'm not interested in cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on individual thoughts that are creating individual actions. What we're doing is all encompassing. Dissolving too much thinking, of course, yeah. How? So cognitive redirection therapy in the practice has a mechanism. What is it?
Counterbalance.
Counterbalance has a mechanism. What is it?
Deliberate choice.
Deliberate choice, yes, but no.
You're talking about the recipe for it, aren't you?
What is the recipe for? What do we have to do? What is cognitive
We
redirection
have
therapy?
to
What is
use
redirection?
redirection is using at least three tricks of attention.
The rule of 3. Absolutely. And the rule of 3 I have made up. I created that based on my own experience, and it seems to be helpful. It works. The more you pay attention to your sensory perception, the less you are able to simultaneously pay attention to your thought. You don't do both very well. We are using the way that the human body is hardwired to serve us. So the rule of 3 is cognitive redirection therapy. I don't need to think the same thoughts in the same order. That's not being passive. It's just getting out of dysfunctional habitual patterns. I'm not going to pretend my house isn't burning down. I'm just going to get the fuck out. I'm not going to pretend that the world isn't killing itself. I'm just not going to think about it all of the time in the same old way, because that's just simply not beneficial to me. It's repetitive, it's habitual, it doesn't make me feel well, it doesn't lead to creativity, it doesn't lead to good solutions. It leads to trying to figure it out and thinking and thinking and thinking, and then thinking about more thinking. And eventually we are so far away from creativity that we're going to come up with some bullshit. Does that make sense? So cognitive redirection therapy is redirecting your mind back to the practice, not to the thoughts that Ernest has told you to think, not to the thoughts that Abraham has told you to think, not the thoughts that Lisa has told us to think. I just saw Lisa's name. It has nothing to do with that. You redirect back to sensory attention training, which is your senses, which is your body, which is your mind, which is your world around you. It has nothing to do with Ernest's philosophy. Nothing, absolutely nothing. You're welcome to use hydrostasy, which is my practice, but you don't have to. Shit, that's my practice. It would be weird if you did exactly what I did. That would make no sense, because you don't live and do what I do exactly. So that wouldn't make any sense at all. And it circles back around to the practice. Exactly, Jerry. That's the way we remove the guru without declaring war on gurus. It's the way that you remove the teacher, the constant need for a teacher, without declaring war on teachers. It's how you remove the need for constant healing without declaring war on healers. you go back to the practice, back to the practice. What practice? Sensory attention training. Am I paying attention to my sensory perception, which is my ability to pay attention to the world around me? I'm either doing it or I'm not. It is mindfulness, just embodied mindfulness, explained in a way that hopefully some people can relate to. So cognitive redirection therapy is the rule of three. And then we get to what Lauren said, because if we can redirect, if we can find a little bit of peace and paying attention to the present moment, all of a sudden we now have the opportunity. Sometimes when we're redirecting, we don't really see everything that's happening as it's happening. Does that make sense? The act of redirection, you're redirecting it. But cognitive attention training is when we start to just become aware of ourselves. We become hyper aware of our own thoughts. We become hyper aware of our own actions. We become hyper aware of the world around us. And I just say hyper, maybe I shouldn't, I don't want to use that. Okay, I retract the word hyper. You're just far more aware than you were before when you were in an unconscious pattern of acting out life experience. And that's called cognitive attention training. That's the seer's training. We're now able to really just see our own mind. We're able to see how we feel our own emotion. The seer can see it. And of course, by seeing, I mean feel it, not sight, not necessarily vision, but we can feel it. It's a different perspective. And that's where the behavioral change will come. Does that make sense? So in cognitive behavioral therapy, they're looking to identify thoughts to change specific behaviors. We're not doing that. We're getting to the root of the psychosis, the root of all psychological suffering. And now that we have the cognitive attention, we can now see our own mind. We can see the soda and we can see the water. I can feel the water and then I choose the water without declaring war on the soda. Does that make sense? Right, Jerry, it's all a part of the transcendental embodiment approach. This is just and I would not use I'm never going to use transcendental embodiment approach in an academic paper.
Because you'll use something else, or
I'll use all these other acronyms. Sensory attention training, asset, cognitive attention training. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess that's what I was asking is, are you preferring a different term?
It's not a preference. It's not a preference. It's just something I can do. I have the ability personally to describe things in many different ways. If we want to talk T, we can. We might start talking vibration. We might start talking, inner guru and stuff like that. I'm not going to be able to have that conversation with my psychology professor. He's going to tell me to fuck off. You see what I mean? He's going to be, because he wants evidence-based. He's already explained that at the beginning of the class. He wants sources, he wants citations, he wants evidence-based. I can do that with these other acronyms. So one is more for academia, because some people read that, they understand that, they learn that way. But I still have something for everybody else, which is T, transcendental. I won't use that word in academia because I can't explain it. How do I explain transcendental right now in an academic term? I can't, personally, not yet.
Third ring, is that?
Even that though, sensing the third ring, that's not academic, you know what I mean? Maybe I will be able to someday, but not yet.
I meant that you can't explain the transcendental because it's third ring, yeah?
Yes, perfect. Mm-hmm. Exactly, Lauren. It can start to sound that way. Well, it'll start to sound spiritual. And I can assure you, this particular psychology professor this semester doesn't give two hoots about my spirituality. So I can't talk that way. Do you see what I mean, Jerry? So today we're just talking about it in a very, well, no, not all day, but in these terms, these acronyms, It's really just explaining it in a way that is already in the psychology textbooks. I'm using their words, their ideas, building on it. Does that make sense? And so they'll be able to see that. And I'll be able to use sources and citations.
In their language.
In their
really.
language. Exactly. Exactly. And that's okay. I'm okay with that.
But aren't you finding, it's a question, in your class that sometimes psychology can be outdated without T? I know you've probably, had chapters you studied, examples you got to write about where T might very easily change what they're putting somebody in a box for.
It will.
Psychology
Yeah, no, it all
is very
will.
much about a box.
No, it all will, for sure.
Yeah.
And hopefully somebody, if they learn these academic terms, they might want to try T. Or try hydrostasy, which is my particular practice. Or try something that you guys create that's T-based. See what I mean? But yes, everything, this is not represented. That's why I'm adding it. That's why it's my thesis. That's why I want to add it to academia, because what we're talking about, it's just not present. Attention is just been missed. It's just not focused on the nature of attention, the importance of attention, the value of attention. So that's really where I'm going into. That's my lane, attention. Who's surprised? And then that's pretty much all the acronyms I have, I think. Pretty much just stops there. Because as Lauren said, we can see our responses at this stage. And I may create another circle that talks about the behavioral change. So I don't leave the towel on the bed, not because Shayna wants, well, no, it is because Shayna doesn't like the towel on the bed, but she doesn't like it on the bed for a good reason. It makes the bed soggy, it makes the blanket soggy, and it can get a little bit moldy smelling, and nobody likes a wet towel on the bed. So the way that I don't leave the towel on the bed is to pay attention to the present moment and remind myself, sometimes with mantras, to not using the energy of denial, but just remembering that this is my desire. My desire is to not leave the towel on the bed. If I can pay attention, I can do it. What happens if I do leave it on the bed? That's okay. I'm surely not going to beat myself up about it. I'm not going to judge myself about it. I'm not going to compare, contrast, try to figure it out. I'll just remove it. And then next time I will remember, very likely. So that takes me off of the unexcelled perfect enlightenment list, because I'm not. I have created my own psychological suffering and my own spider's web, and those are the things that I navigate. I need to remember things that I need to remember, just like you need to remember things that you need to remember. So there's a certain point where this practice is all empowering, because it's you. It's about you. I'm not doing it. Lauren doesn't stub her toe as much as she used to. That makes sense. I don't do half of the fumbling things that I used to. Accidents don't happen as often when you're cognitively aware of your own body, your own mind, your own emotion, the things that you say, the things that you do. For the average mind, these things are only realized in retrospect, after they're angry, after the de-escalation. It's more a reaction as opposed to proactivity. Any questions? And then that is how the behavioral change starts to occur. And I mean, ultimately, the behavioral change can be very important, and we all know it. Ida and everybody here is probably already experiencing, in small ways, maybe in some other big ways, behavioral change. And it is not by using force, trying to control. We just see it, and eventually it won't feel good. If you're paying attention to the world around you without cognitive resistance, you'll see that lying is just a product of self-importance. Oh, rushing around is so perfect, Lauren. That's happening. We live in Chicago. People are rushing despite not being late. They're rushing despite putting themselves in a position to kill themselves and everybody around them. Potentially, I said, not, of course not definitely, but there's just no point. It's reckless, it's dangerous, and it's stupid, and we're not using death as our advisor. We're acting like we're going to live forever. Good example, rushing around. Hey, Jerry, you have a question, comment, concern?
I'm gonna lower my hand.
Mhm.
And I think, like I think you've alluded to before, I think it would be accurate to say one of the beautiful things regarding T is it doesn't require going to a therapist to talk about your life weekly, monthly, talk about my story, where I've been, the pain, the story. It would be my understanding, having studied now for 3 years, this practice, you start right where you're at. Redirect your mind, the thinking about the story, the remembering the story. That's what we're redirecting. You can start right now. No therapy involved. It's profound.
Mm-hmm.
It's profound.
Yeah. So, I do use the word therapy though, but yeah, I know what you mean. There's no need for that psychotherapy. So we're not going to go into the psychodynamics. We're not going to go into our past. Although, Jerry, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's say somebody has never had anybody to talk to, and they go to a therapist to talk to them. Who am I to say if they feel better from that's wrong? So I don't throw that out. Mental health is a very important thing in this country. So I could use any of us as an example if they've never had anybody to talk to, or just sometimes the act of expressing yourself or getting it off of your shoulders is the way that we talk about it. It can be a relief. Is that a cure? Fuck no, absolutely not. That does not solve the problem of dysfunctional cognition. What is dysfunctional cognition? Thinking to ourselves in unproductive ways. What is unproductive? Repetitive, habitual. It's not solution based. We're just complaining. We're not really coming up with anything creative. Those are not functional forms of cognition. An intelligent species wouldn't just sit there and think poor fucking me all the time. Do you see what I mean? For example, it always comes back to our thinking. Yes, because it's the thinking in this particular human experience, this human species, we have favored thinking instead of engaging the world around us. So the only solution is to engage the world around us, not even declare war on thinking, because that would be the Buddhist idea that we just shouldn't ever have thought. Thought is evil. How is that possible? You see what I mean? All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns? I think I'm going to do a workshop soon. If you guys think you'd want to come to a workshop, a weekend workshop. I'm working at 2 p.m., so I could do an early morning workshop on maybe like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, a 3-day workshop if you wanted.
What are you thinking about doing a workshop on?
Something. I don't know. Send me some ideas. I don't know. But I would advertise it a little bit, see if people are interested in coming. Yeah, maybe Voice of Power would be appropriate because I could use my book chapters.
How about, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Well,
I was just going to say, how about sharing tea? I still struggle with that. I have such adoration for this practice, and I just don't know
that's
how
a
to
good
share
one.
it. I don't know how to share it with people. My daughter brought it up yesterday. She invited me to go shopping with her. I haven't done that in a year. And, some things came up and I wasn't tending her garden or anything like that, but she brought up a friend who's in a tough spot right now. I don't know how to share it. I don't know how to do that. And I have a desire to learn that. Just,
Okay.
you know,
And I probably need to reiterate it to myself as well. So that could be very timely. One of the aspects to this practice that I really am focusing on without, creating resistance in my own experience, I really should remember my four voices. All too often, I'm meeting people directly. I find myself explaining things that weren't asked for. They're not asking these questions, and it starts to look a lot like preaching. My son pointed that out. He just asked a question, and I just went off in the fucking left field, talk, 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 talk. That's not the four voices. That's not in alignment with the principles of that aspect of the practice. You know what I mean? And I'll explain why. I think that would be a great little workshop. I don't know if I could do 3 days of that, but maybe that could be an aspect of it. So I'll think of something. I'll have something occur and we'll do it. And then maybe Donna can attend too, because it would be on the weekend or something like that. We'll see. Okay. Well, I will see you guys again on Monday for sure. Otherwise, we'll do something on the weekend here coming up, and I'll make sure you guys get plenty of notice. So if you're interested, you can come. But I'll let you know. I think that's a good idea. I think that could be a part of maybe like a 3-day workshop where we talk about sharing tea. I think that'd be cool.
yeah. And I'm not talking like you just said. I'm not talking about, oh, I'm just going to go out, because that's never been my gig.
Right.
I'm
No,
just going to go
I
out and
know.
start talking to you. But when it comes up, you're asked or something,
Mm-hmm.
I just struggle with it. I'm too close to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ernest.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll see you guys again soon. All right. Thanks for hanging out.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
And I'll post this on
Bye.
YouTube today, so you can watch the replay if you want.
Thank
All right,
you.
see you guys. Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.